Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fin Factor. I'm your host, Blaine Bertsch, co-founder and CEO at Dry Run Cash Flow Forecasting Software. And I'm really excited today to have Keith Dazer joining me. Keith is the owner of Deliver Digital, an IT consulting firm that helps businesses and IT leaders select the right technology partners to avoid costly missteps and get the results they need. Thanks for joining me, Keith.
Thank you so much for having me, Blaine.
So I know we talked, it was about a week ago. We were talking just a little bit about the show, and we talked for so long. I kind of at the end went, well, we should have just recorded that and we'd be done because we just got, it was such a interesting stuff that you guys do. And, close to my heart because we work with all of these businesses, mid-market businesses, often finance pros, CFOs. And of course, they're trying to get technology platforms that actually work. And sometimes they go down the wrong path. And I know that's where you guys come in.
Yeah, I feel like technology is one of those things, especially in the mid-market, that has this huge promise of what it can do for organizations. Everyone hears what's new in the news around AI. They hear the doom and gloom around security. They see what their neighbors are doing with technology, and there's this promise of the world that can exist. But most organizations we talk to kind of look over the fence and see something aspirational, but can't quite figure out how to do it themselves.
Yeah, I can see, like, I know how complicated it is because we can see it. It's like it's not as simple. A really small business, like, yeah, for my finance package, I'm getting a QBO and plug it in, and we're kind of going right. But you get to a larger business, and there's no way around it. Like, how many different, just top of your head, on average, how many different sort of packages, platforms, IT, security things would kind of have to mesh together to just get something workable?
Oh my gosh, it would be tough to put an exact number to it, but organizations we're going into, and that these are small organizations sometimes can have 30, 40, 50 different applications. And the number is growing. So all of a sudden you have someone in their sales group that buys a small CRM because their CRM doesn't quite do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Someone buys an event management software, and all of a sudden you have all of these softwares building and building and building. There's data that's sprawling across the organization, and this is probably maybe the opposite of music to your ears in the work that you're doing. But most of these are now SaaS applications as well, so they're just also incrementally just notching up the expenses that are not large enough that they set off any big alarm bells, but they grow and grow over time to the point where they can add up to be pretty significant.
When you said 30 to 40, I'm like, oh, there's how on, I couldn't even imagine. And then I realized, I'm like, yeah, we have a spreadsheet where we track the technology we have in house. I'm like, yeah, there's well over 2 dozen, and it doesn't even track a lot of the desktop stuff or any of it. Mostly it tracks the stuff that we have subscriptions to, whether it's annual or monthly or whatever. And yeah, it really does add up. And over the last couple of years, we've actually gone through that spreadsheet and started to really prune back things that were like, why are we spending this much money on this software or that software? We've got a better option over here. And we've done a little bit of that ourselves. And we're just a little business, right? So I can imagine you get to a mid-sized business like that, the complexity must go like up tenfold.
The complexity goes up and the stakes go up as well, because especially if you think about, there's the small SaaS applications that add up over time, but there's also some of these big investments that organizations make. It might be an ERP, it might be a CRM,
Mhm.
maybe it's their managed service provider. And these are big ticket items that organizations, maybe they make these transactions once or twice in their career. And the stakes, if they get them wrong, are pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah. It can go into, well, then you're talking, it could go into over a couple of years, millions of dollars, like literally. Uh, that's a big ticket. So I'm kind of curious, like first of all, there's sort of a two-pronged question here. When is the right time to engage a pro like you guys to help with this? And when do people usually engage you? Because I have a feeling there's probably, can you come clean up the mess? And there's also other times where it's like, you should engage at the start. I'm just sort of guessing, right?
Yeah, like I think that in a perfect world, people will be able to say, I need these things. I have I define a need for my business. You build the requirements, you go to market for it, and you find something that perfectly fits those needs. The reality is that there's no perfect starting point. Unless you start your business today, there's a decision that you made with the information that you had 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and it was the right decision at the time.
Mhm.
But there is legacy things that come along with decisions you made in the past. And so there's no silver bullet that says, okay, January 1st is the perfect time to look at this. So
Yeah.
what we suggest is the first step that any organization can take is just understanding what they have. And so that's one thing we where we usually start with organizations, especially in the small and medium business, is just helping them map out what technology do we have in place? What agreements do we have in place? Are we getting value out of them? Are they overlapping? Or are 3 out of the 5 of them doing the exact same thing? And helping
Yeah.
that build that really clear picture of the ecosystem that they're a part of, and not even acting on them, but just helping them understand where they are today and their unique starting point.
And I imagine that, so that's the time when it's like you can get started at any point and there's going to be value. In fact, like I remember talking not too long ago with a friend of mine, again, a small business, not a really big business. And they discovered they had a software package that had been running for years and no one was really paying attention to it. And he was really, no one was using it. And he saw the bill was at over 3 grand a month. He's
Oh my
like,
gosh.
yeah. And because it was one of these ones that ramped up with users. And so it was connected, priced by user. They weren't even really using it, but their user just kept their list kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the ticket kept, and he's like, oh my God. So like, how fast can you cancel that? Right. And it's, well, I've had a few not quite fortunately to that level, but a few times we've kind of discovered, holy smokes, that is the wrong package for us. We should have canceled that, 2 years ago and have blown through, a few grand easy of dollars. Right. So what do you think is what's a lot of times like the sort of the trigger point of when people in this come and talk with you? Like, is it that they discover something and go, oh man, I bet you it's a big can of worms, or what kind of happens?
Yeah, well, I would say there's kind of 3 different types of buyers that would traditionally engage with us. The first one would be, these are senior executives that they have a shopping list. I need to buy X. My managed service contract is coming up. I need to buy a new CRM. These are people that understand that they have a need, but just don't have the experience or domain knowledge to go through that transaction without a little bit of guidance.
Mhm.
The second would be, these are business leaders that are looking for a change, and I think that's kind of the person that I described at the very beginning. These are the people that just have never really seen the promise of technology live up to what they hope it could be,
Mhm.
and these are people that get frustrated, so they engage at a point of frustration where they're fed up. Maybe I have a customer, they've had 4 managed services customers in the last 6 years.
Yeah.
And that story you hear over and over again. And these business leaders are just really tired, and they want to use technology. They believe in technology, but they don't know how to incorporate it into their business. And then the third is a little bit more niche, but these are technology leaders that are trying to create more value for their customers. And those customers could be the end users in their organization if it's a little bit of a larger company, or it could be some of these service delivery organizations that are saying, hey, I actually need to communicate with my customers better. I need to focus on these transactions. And it's almost the flip side of how do I deliver value to these customers and end users we're supporting.
I'm guessing, and I'm probably not too far off the mark, that with a lot of businesses, one of the big purchases is when they move up to an ERP. Like I hear that all the time. That's one of the generally pretty common, really big ticket implementations that they go through. Is that something that you commonly that kind of see, or a big one for you? Or
The ERP and CRM side of things are just huge tickets. They incorporate all areas of the business. They incorporate a ton of understanding of data. It's not something where you can go and buy an ERP and be like, you know what, we're rolling this out next week. It's going to be fantastic. Everyone buckle up. These are things that take planning, they take deliberateness, and they're usually huge investments for these organizations.
yeah, yeah, it's. I imagine a bit of a misstep there could be costly, not just from a dollar perspective, but even just the pain that they bring their staff, the pain that they bring their team if they haven't got the right kind of the
Yeah.
right systems in place.
And one challenge we see a lot of organizations, especially in those kind of transactions, is you have almost like a very secretive purchasing committee, right? Where they don't want to spook everyone in making these changes themselves. So what they do is they do it all behind kind of in the darkness of night. They go and they talk to vendors. They're meeting at coffee shops. They're not bringing them to the office, and all of a sudden they have this grand reveal of great news. Everyone, we're making these switches. From my perspective, that's the exact opposite approach that you should take. You know,
Mhm.
the ones that I've seen go incredibly well are the ones where you're getting the feedback from people that are using it. You're building um, that list of wins that you can deliver specifically to end users and to people that are using the platform. And not in a
Mhm.
broad sense. It's, the ones that I see go best is, Angela has this very specific problem whenever she has to create an invoice. And if you can solve that specific problem for Angela and you can publish that as you're going through that transition, all of a sudden you've created a hero and a huge supporter of that change. And if
Mhm.
you do that over and over again, it's going to create a momentum that's actually going to rally the entire organization around some of those investments you're making.
Yeah, and it's actually it's like I get it. It's understandable, but it's also a little bit fascinating that it's instead of talking with the team about something that's going to solve their problems, let's go talk with the salesperson about what they think is going to solve our problem. And
Yeah,
it's a probably a very different approach, right?
and the salespeople are salespeople for a reason. You know, they're very good at sales,
Mhm.
and a lot of organizations as well, when they take that earlier approach where they just try to do it by the darkness at night,
Yeah.
they get swept up into these sales cycles that all of a sudden don't even resemble each other. So all of a
Mhm.
sudden they're talking to Salesforce and HubSpot or Dynamics or whatever the platform to solve their challenge may be. But those organizations have a very good way of pulling them into what their exact use cases are and what they're very strong at, and kind of bringing them along that wave versus staying really grounded in the things you're actually trying to buy at the very beginning.
Yeah, and I imagine that the if you could be in those meetings with the salesperson as almost like a translator, salesperson says something, you turn and you translate, that probably be ultra valuable, right? Like, yeah, yeah. No, what they mean is, you know,
Yeah, well, we just went through a CRM migration with a large, or we're in the middle of the migration, but we went through the selection process with a large insurance company. And one of the things that we did differently this time that really worked well is we actually spent time coaching the salespeople. So if you think about these evaluation committees, once you get to a point where you're doing demos and you're having a huge amount of senior leaders that take up a lot of time to understand how these will impact their business, how they work. And instead of, publishing a list of requirements and saying, put your best foot forward, spending the extra time with those vendors in advance, doing dry runs with the people that were pitching to make the best use of the SLT time so that they could actually properly evaluate was something we did differently. And
Mhm.
even the feedback from salespeople was that this is like nothing we've been through before, and it made it so much easier as well for.
Yeah, it's funny because I think they probably would be like their alarm bells are probably going off at first, but then yeah, it's like, you know what, we're going to have a better an exact understanding of this is what their needs are, and if we deliver it to them, it's a home run. They're going to love us, and it's going to be easy. It kind of makes sense for everybody, right? But it would help a lot, like again, to have someone in the middle to facilitate, like you, to facilitate all of that, because that's it's just going to be a real challenge otherwise, I imagine.
Yeah, and I think that it takes the ability to kind of remove yourself from both entities, understanding that you're representing the success of both parties and the overall solution, and kind of guiding both of the parties through that. It can actually deliver something pretty cool.
Yeah. Now, okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit because you've said like, okay, this one worked terrific, and this is why. This one worked terrific, and this is why. You know, obviously not naming any names or anything, but share a couple stories where things didn't work out very well, because I think that's the other thing is it's got to be a little bit of warning bells for some of the CFOs out there, whatever they're listening to go, oh yeah, I could see that happening, right? But like, what is when have you seen it sort of go wrong, and what sort of impact did it have?
I can say that probably all the things that I know are from things that have gone wrong. I feel like most of my experience is you try things out, some things work, some things don't.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the value that gets brought to the table is some of those experiences. The things, I have a ton of horror stories um, from disengagement probably being the worst one, where people just stop interacting and talking to each other. And I think that is actually one of the worst things that can happen. I worked with a customer where we were asked to go to RFP.
Hmm.
And so we were asked to help bring them to RFP for a certain set of services. We went through, we did all the discovery. We spent quite a bit of time mapping out exactly what they needed to go to bid for. And when we started pulling all the pieces together, the thing that we really quickly realized was the solution that they had actually was perfectly fine. The thing they
Mhm.
weren't doing was talking to the vendor, and all of the challenges that they had actually could stem back to that lack of communication. And so our recommendation was actually to not go to RFP at all, and to put in place a work strategy to kind of get that relationship back on track, so that you could then get value. And it was going to be way cheaper for them, but it was going to be way better for them because they had the solution they needed. They just didn't know how to actually get the value out of it properly.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. And the vendor itself, they would likely never know. Like, how would you know unless there's a
Yep.
constant sort of like account manager checking in, but checking in with legit questions, not just, yeah, how's it going? How's it going? Okay,
Yeah.
like, how do you do that, right?
And coming from the other side too, where I do have the experience on the sales side, on growing the business side, where sometimes the narrative that happens in that organization is completely different. This is the customer that's disengaged, that just doesn't want to work with us, and all of a sudden they just start pulling away because their efforts go unmatched.
Mm,
And so
yeah,
it's almost like a really dysfunctional relationship where you almost have to become a counselor between the two parties and say, okay, this is how we become friends again.
yeah. And the alternative is long, hard, costly,
Yeah.
incredibly difficult. So hopefully there's enough incentive on both sides to try and figure out, hey, can the system work? So I imagine when you're doing that, like you're there's times you're talking, you're sort of an intermediary between, let's say, salespeople and someone in procurement or whatever it is, or there. But then there's other times where it's like, okay, now you have technical staff on this side, technical staff on that side. I imagine you have to understand all the different roles and juggle all of those roles and how they kind of work into the puzzle, I guess. Eh?
Yeah, and I've been really fortunate to surround myself with some really smart people that are far smarter than I am, especially when you think about some of the technical elements and the speed of innovation that's happening. I think that there's no one person that's an expert in all of the domains. The person that
Yeah,
really understands modern AI might struggle with legacy architecture. The person that's
yeah,
really strong with security might have a huge aversion to touching anything to do with end user devices.
yeah,
And those technical experts and having that strong bench of them is really important, and that we can pull on based on the negotiations and discussions we're in.
yeah,
Um, and having that combination of specialists and generalists is critical. I think one of the big discussions that I've been having with a lot of different leaders right now is that changing wave of specialists versus generalists when it comes to IT. And I think
mm,
that with a lot of the modern tools that are coming into play, we kind of go back and forth between the idea of specialists and generalists and when they make sense. If you look at most modern service organizations right now, the thing that you're buying from them is scale and generalization. If I can't have 14 people around the clock that are going to be able to answer the phone. I need scale.
mhm.
But with a lot of these new tools, with a lot of these things that are coming up, I think that, to your point around that specialization, we require a different level of domain expertise to guide organizations through these big changes.
Mhm.
Um, and it is going to fundamentally shake up the industry as well in a really exciting way.
I think the one that I know we've talked a little bit about like ERP and finance and CRM, and like I'm familiar with that because we connect with a lot of that stuff. The one that perks my ears every time it comes out of your mouth, and I know people listening are thinking the exact same thing, is security. As soon as you mention security, it's like that's a huge scary area because of the risk involved, but it's also something that you can kind of put an ERP in, and 5 years later it's like, you updated a bit, tweaked a bit. But security is not like that. Like, that has to be right at the forefront. Tell me a little bit about that whole area. Like, what do you see working well? What do you see not working well? What should organizations be really considering in that area?
Yeah. So this is an area I'm incredibly passionate about. In a previous world, I actually ran a large security group.
Mm,
Um, and this is an area as well that is changing. It'll change by the time we have this conversation. There's a couple big factors that I think are really propelling the change. AI being one of them, and AI working hand in hand with some of these, cyber criminals is also just making them more and more powerful. And there's this giant game of leapfrog happening between all of these
mm,
security vendors and these threat actors. And all
Yeah.
you have, one leapfrogs the other with some new innovation, the other catches up, and so on and so forth, and it kind of keeps going around and around. My views on the security industry as a whole, and this might not be the answer you were expecting, but um, it's an incredibly saturated space right now based on all of the fear and uncertainty and kind of this black box thinking that everyone sees. They see security, they see these big breaches all over the news,
Hmm.
and they get nervous. But with that nervousness comes a huge opportunity for people to invest in all these security companies, and all of a sudden we have this glut of options. So, in terms of MDR, which is kind of a managed detection and response software, these are off the shelf things that you can buy that can kind of give you a very reasonable sense of security. It's not the only protection, but it's a really good step in the right direction. There's like 10 of them now. There's 15, and there's just more and more of these different options that are continuing to grow. And if I'm a consumer, there's no way I can even pick
Yeah. Yeah.
between any of these. And then all of a sudden you have, your 10 or 15 options in backup, and your 10 or 15 options in security awareness, and your 10 or 15 options in threat detection and threat intelligence, and the list goes on and on and on. And all of a sudden, like there's no possible way that unless you spend your entire day and night, foregoing most of your business and research and security, that you can
Yeah.
even keep up. Um,
And I'm
and
guessing there's also the law of diminishing returns. So you could spend a lot of money on this and keep throwing more and more money, and it's like, yeah, it's the security is actually not getting much better. This is what
yeah,
you guys need versus this is, I know you're freaked out, but you probably
yeah,
don't need everything, right?
yeah, and I think that I agree with you completely. There's what's practical and reasonable in a textbook, and maybe in a theoretical sense, and then what is practical for a business, right? Each of these things costs money. Each of these things has the potential to restrict a certain way of working,
Hmm.
and you have to weigh the investments you're making, the uh, you know jumps backwards potentially in productivity. If you have to, um, you know, go press a button in your office every day to go make sure you can work, and you're on the other side of the country, you just like the security is broke.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it is a little bit of a shift in paradigm in terms of how security is being viewed. There's a lot of options out there. Um, there's a lot of fear out there, and I think that a simple, defense in depth framework that has reasonable precautions that layers a couple different protections is what most businesses actually need, not
Hmm.
the $4 million Cadillac that does every single thing under the sun.
Yeah. And like even with our small organization, it's still, I'm sure it drives everybody nuts every time someone needs to log in to do anything. And you've got all these layers of security and two factor. And some of it seems like you can't do more than one two factor. So it's one of our phones is buzzing, and but no one complains because it's like, yeah, it's better than the alternative.
Yeah.
We know we just need security. It's just one of the, but it's like every day it's like pulling a band-aid off. It's just kind of annoyed, right?
And I will give the shameless plug for two factor. Like if there's literally one thing you do, I feel like that is the one of the highest value, lowest cost things you can do is just have like a reasonable two factor authentication in place. But then
Mm-hmm.
that's where it comes into the partnership and ecosystems, right? Where then you start to look at everything holistically and you understand how everything fits together.
Yeah.
And there's ways you can reduce some of that user friction. Because one thing I also know is that if things create friction, people are very creative and will find ways around
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And
We always are doing that, especially my co-founder who's our CTO. Every once in a while he'll read us the riot act a little bit just to make sure it's like, no, 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 don't even, even someone grumbling about two factor, it's like, yep, no, we're not even, don't even go there, but it's also, we all feel pretty good about that because we know it is, we've just heard that two factor is one of the things that can be like really low friction for a pretty big level of security. So it's just, that's what we do. Right. And
yeah, and most people are used to it now, right? Like I think that if you look back 3 or 4 years, you used to have to do a pretty good sales job to convince people that they needed to also authenticate on their phone or whatever it may be. I think most
yeah.
people are used to it, whether it be their bank, whether it be their SaaS applications. I think it's less of a leap now than it was a couple of years ago.
I know I was logging into something the other day, and then it asked me to do. I was like create a passkey, a biometric passkey or something, and I'm like, and I wasn't really paying attention, and I clicked next, thinking it would take me to the next screen, but then actually I'm like, oh shit, now it made this key
No,
thing, and I'm like, well, shit, I hope I didn't just lock everybody else out so no one else can do it because I just made really fancy two factor. I still don't know if I kind of screwed everybody up,
yeah,
but like,
it just requires a little bit of your DNA, and um, yeah, there you go. Well, thank you for securing. Yeah,
I'm surprised when I put my finger down. I know pretty soon it's going to be like, pooh, ow, and just like grab a little blood test from me or something,
yeah,
right?
that's yeah, the most secure is DNA. There you go.
Yeah, it's I don't think anyone is all that interested in our whatever it was our G drive was like nothing really overly useful. But anyway, it's you still got it. We got to stay on top of it. It's what so I like I do want to actually just ask you because just that we mentioned a little bit about like ERP, CRM, security. Those are some of the big ones. What are some of the some of the technologies that you find organizations, especially as they're growing, maybe have overlooked or they've lived on kind of duct tape and chicken wire for a while, and it's like, okay, now's the time to get serious about more than just like your ERP or whatever.
I think that a lot of the area where people have a friction and kind of from the way they used to do things is actually around how they support their team itself. So I think that organizations when they're small and nimble will find very creative ways to support the organization. They kind of support the Google mentality where people kind of fend for themselves a tiny bit. You set in place some security controls, then people will self-support. And then all of a sudden you kind of get to a spot in scale where the cost of outages and downtime are fairly significant and they start to grow in importance. And so they
Mm,
start to explore, how do I actually support our teams? How do I make sure that people know how to use the technology? All of a sudden it makes a little bit less sense to have one of the founders deploying computers um, and
yeah.
kind of provision them whenever someone starts. And so you start to reach that moment of scale. And this is an area where there's a lot of option, but there's also a lot of confusion around the things that are available to organizations. And people really believe there's one of two paths. They believe that I can either hire someone, and in that scenario, you're probably kind of hiring a jack of all trades that isn't super experienced. It's kind of looking for their shot in the world, which is sometimes great. Or you're going a full managed service route, which is I'm just going to hand over the keys to someone and not worry about
Yeah.
it. And I think more and more when you think about the needs of some of these organizations, I think the answer is actually somewhere in the middle. There's a lot more work happening in the fractional space. There's a lot more requirement for specialized knowledge around whether it be their core business applications, whether it be the things that make their business run. That just a one size fits all solution actually can create a lot of friction for organizations. And so that's one of the things that we see over and over again as some of these service oriented organizations. They're really good at the 80%, your Microsoft stack, your Google stack, your Zoom, et cetera. But the things that are the crown jewels to these organizations, and arguably the most important, get forgotten. It actually slows these organizations down from a day-to-day standpoint. So I think that
Mm.
a lot of focus and attention gets put on some of these big ticket items, but the mechanics fixing the car every time you pull into the pit lane, I think, is actually where a lot of friction is created.
It's a really interesting perspective, and I can see the like because we're seeing that with a lot of experts now. A little fractional sort of makeup for CTO, CMO, CRO, CFO, all of that kind of stuff. It makes a lot of sense because I think if it was completely outsourced, there's potentially quite a disconnect. Like who kind of owns the space and who's kind of really keeping an eye on it. But if it's completely internal, do you have the expertise that you need? And yeah, that makes a lot of sense is that, there's someone that really owns it, but you're tapping into a larger group that has, like you said, those specialists that have the expertise
Yeah.
for these little silos, right?
Yeah, and so I think the recipes changed a little bit, and I think the ingredients that are available to people are a little bit different. And that on the same token of security, I think security can be the thing that gets in the way, but security is also the thing that can enable you to have different people do work in your organization that aren't necessarily a full-time employee. You can trust them with certain elements of information. You can trust someone remotely to connect in and provide guidance and expertise in a way like you couldn't even a couple of years ago.
Yeah. It's the world is changing fast, and even with us as we're engaging with different, especially larger accounting firms. There's you're going through a. I wish they had a universal one because it's always different, but they're full security audit and everything, and of course we have like just reams of policies and documentation and all. Like we, of course, we have all that,
Yeah.
and I do remember one large organization we went through and they asked us about like one little, like out of 50 questions, what about this one? And they just kind of were poking at it. And then I said, we're replacing the spreadsheet. And they just went, oh, and all done because it was like, oh, you're replacing this giant gaping hole over here. And it was like,
Yeah.
it's like you did, asking frankly about something probably a little bit silly, but it was on their checklist. And as soon as I said that, they're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, okay. That's, yeah,
Yeah. No,
we
that makes
get it.
sense. Yeah.
That's a big step forward, right? It's, but
Yeah.
I credit them with having that. And, for us, I never complain about it because it keeps us, it keeps us sort of not, I don't want to say honest. It keeps us like on our toes and keeps us at the forefront all the time because we're getting these questions all the time, and we know like, okay, what's the latest sort of thing, and it comes from our customers, and that's a big part of what we have to stay on top of.
Yeah, and I think that it's awesome that you take that seriously as well. Like I feel like there's some organizations that I've interacted with in the past when you ask some of those security questions and you get the blank stares. I think that's when you get a little bit nervous and you should probably run in the other direction. Um,
Yeah,
but the forms I know are
this big, you know.
yeah, and then you just got to play a little mix and match with the document and make sure you move all the information into the right spots and you're good to go.
Yeah, it's a little foundation there that does it. It comes in handy, and we also know we always have this fallback. And it's also not just the documentation, but it's the processes and everything that we put in place at the time that just helps us stay on track, right?
Yeah.
Even as a small organization. So as we grow, it's there. We have that foundation. This was a really great conversation, Keith. Closing words. One last thing. Why should like if you're a CFO listening to this or another executive, um, number one sort of reason that they should come talk with you today?
I think the number one reason they should come talk to me today is that there's a world that technology can propel their businesses. There's an exciting opportunity for the way that technology can play a role in how they run the business, how their team works together, how they collaborate. Um, and I genuinely believe that there's a change happening in terms of how businesses compete using technology.
You kind of hit the nail on the head. We've talked so much about the things that can go wrong, but the advantage of having the right technology stack is enormous.
Yeah, and I think that if organizations can find a way to capitalize on it, they're going to propel forward. They're going to be able to attract the right people. They're going to be able to compete differently, and it's going to be way more fun too. I think that there's almost a fun kind of sci-fi element to how everything's unfolding, but it does take time, and it does require a deliberate foundation. It does require people taking steps together, and you won't get there overnight.
How can people find you if they're looking for you, want to talk with you?
That's great. I have a large LinkedIn presence, so you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. I also have a website, www.deliverdigital.ca. And if you reach out to me, I would love to chat with you.
I'll make sure that that's all in the show notes so they can track you down. Link to your LinkedIn profile, link to your website. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us on the show today. Again, if you're looking for a way to forecast your cash flow, especially if you're buried in a spreadsheet, the more complicated the spreadsheet, the more people involved, the more locations, the more reason you should come and talk with us because we can help you tackle those challenges. And you can come visit us at dryrun.com. Thanks so much, Keith. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch.